Welcome to IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Don Pizzetta.
Coming at you live from San Francisco, California.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
Hello, and thank you for watching IT Pro TV, helping you level up with IT learning everywhere you go. I'm your host, Zach Memis, for this episode of CompTIA Linux Plus. What would you like to do right now? How about configure Bash? We're going to be configuring Bash with Don Pizzetta. Don, good to see you, sir.
Hey, glad to be back. And yep, taking a look at Bash, the born-again shell or the default shell command line interface that's available in most Linux distros. We're going to take a look at how it works, how to configure it, how we can kind of change its behavior a little bit, and get us set up to be ready to write Bash scripts, which we're going to take a look at in another episode. But in this episode, we're going to focus in on that shell specifically. We're going to look at a myriad of configuration files, and I'll show you a couple of things that I like to put in there to tweak that behavior and get it ready for me to use and optimal for my workflow. So it'll be a fun show. It'll definitely be content you'll want to customize for yourself, though. No two people necessarily want the exact same configuration. So take it all with a grain of salt. Some of the stuff you might really like, some of the stuff you might not. You kind of figure that out for you and put in place what works best, well, for you.
Awesome. Don, where can we find the configuration files for Bash?
Well, this is probably the hardest part when it comes to configuring Bash, is that the config files are spread all over the place. Bash itself was not the original shell that was created for Unix. That was just SH, the original shell. And then several others have come out over the years, like the C shell and the Born Again shell is actually the Born shell, or BSH, that was then updated. There's Dash. There's a ton of these different shells. But Bash has become so ubiquitous that a lot of its config files are actually read by the other shells as well. But because there's so much history, the configuration's kind of moved. It's changed the locations, and it can be spread out in a number of different places. So I'm going to show you, I don't know, probably 8 different places where you can actually go to change the way the Bash behaves. But in reality, you'll usually just kind of fall to 1 or 2 different places. So it's not so bad. But let's run through each of these because you might encounter them out there in the real world. First off, Bash originally didn't maintain its own configuration files. You had to use logon scripts to be able to configure it. So when you logged in as a user, the Bash environment would all get set up for you. And when I say originally, I'm talking about like the early 1980s. This was a long time ago. Well, all of that stuff is still there, and a lot of it is still used. And so we can go and look at some of the logon scripts and see how it's configuring my environment. Now, when I mention the environment, let's go to my screen here. I'm logged in. This is a CentOS 7 machine, and I open up a terminal, and I'm staring at a shell, okay? Now, all I really see is my command prompt here on the left, and then a cursor, right? Technically, the shell, by just its absolute base nature, if I were to just run the shell, I would see a cursor, and that's it. So this prompt is actually being customized in order to be rendered that way. And if you fire up CentOS or Fedora or Debian or Ubuntu, each one might actually have a different prompt here because that's been changed somewhere. And when I say somewhere, it might have been changed by a login script, it might have been changed by a config file, or so on. That's why we need to know all these different places to look. It can be a little difficult to track down where these things are being set. So the first thing I want to do is focus on login scripts. And login scripts don't just apply to Bash, they apply to any number of other things. So it's definitely a place you want to look. The first place to look is inside of /etc, right? These are where the global login scripts are set. These are things that will run for every user when they log in. And there's a big one. If I just do let me pull up a listing of everything that starts with PRO. The first one I'm looking for is this file right here, profile/etc/profile. It's a text file, and inside of it, you can put a series of commands, and those will run when a user logs in, right? Well, over time, like many of the Linux software, we don't want to modify the default configuration file. And so over time, they decided to add a subdirectory, and you'll see this profile.d, and there's a number of files found inside of it, right? And see how these all end in like .sh or .csh? These are all shell scripts that can be run, and they do different things. They configure a graphical environment, or they configure color ls to do colorize. Like, see how my executables here are green versus gray. Like, color ls is what's doing that. These are all login scripts that are being executed. And if you take a look at some of this, so I'm going to pull up /etc/profile. What you're going to see in here is hopefully some documentation. See the little pound symbol at the beginning of those lines? Those are all commented out. Those means those commands don't run. Anything with a pound symbol at the beginning is ignored. And so it's just notes that kind of tell us what this file is. And it's telling me these are the system-wide environment and startup programs. System-wide. This is for everybody. This is going to run. So if I want to make changes for everybody, this is a good place to put it. But it's telling me a few other things. For example, if I'm doing functions or aliases, don't put them here. Put them in /etc/bashrc. Now there's another location to go to, right? And right beneath that, it says it's not a good idea to change this file unless you know what you're doing, because you can hose up everybody, including the root user. And they tell us about that /etc/profile.d folder, and you can put things in there instead. And they recommend you do that going forward. But historically, it was this file that contained everything. And as you look down in here, you'll see things like the user path being set, how it's figuring out a user's ID, the system it uses to calculate that ID, where somebody's mail folder would be stored by default, and a number of other things that all relate to our users. And all of this can be overridden other places. It can either be overridden, well, you could do it right here in this file, or we could do it in that profile.d folder, so /etc/profile.d, and all of these are little scripts that'll execute and can potentially override earlier scripts, right? One can override the next. But those are kind of the two places for a global configuration. For an individual user, though, like let's say I want to start up script just for me, those go in your home directory. So let me move back to my home directory. So I'm in /home/dpossett. And inside of here, we'll find some profile files as well. They are hidden, though. Like if I just look at a listing inside of my home directory, I don't see any profile information, right? Inside of /etc, it was called profile and profile.d, right? Well, here, it's hidden with a dot at the beginning of it. So if you do an ls-a to show all the files, you'll see files that have dots at the beginning of them. And what you may find in here is a file called .profile. Now, I don't have one. Looking at mine, I do not see a .profile. And the reason is, well, because I don't have one, right? But if I wanted one, if I wanted something to start when I logged in, I could create a .profile file and put data in there. Now, the other file is .bash_profile, and I do have one of those, right? And those are things that will start up when bash runs. If I run an alternate shell, those might not run. But if I run bash, they will. .profile, on the other hand, that runs as part of me and my login experience. It doesn't care what shell that I'm in, right? So that's why we have so many choices. They each kind of have a different scope applied to them, and it makes it a little bit confusing. A few more things. As far as those scripts there, I was talking about login scripts. There's also logout. See, I've got bash_logout right there. So if I wanted something to run when I logged out of the system, maybe you want to clean up some files or make a log message or something like that, just to kind of create an entry, or you want it to keep some ports open, whatever it is that you want, you can put those in there. But the other file I want to point out is this guy right here, and this is probably the most important one, .bashrc. That's the actual configuration for my bash session. So when I run bash, assuming I haven't overridden anything in any other login scripts, that's where I'm going to go to configure it. And if I run an alternate shell, it's not going to read that, or some of them do, but most of them don't. Or if I run bash, it will read it. Everything in there gets executed and kind of changes my behavior. And that's just from me. There's also, if you look inside of /etc, you'll find in there a bashrc file as well, without a dot at the beginning. This one's not hidden. So here it is right here. And what that is basically like the default bashrc for everybody. So technically the .bashrc that's in my home directory is overriding this one. And if I deleted it, if I just deleted that .bashrc folder out of my home directory, this is the file that would be read to set that default configuration. And if we look at it, so that's /etc/bashrc, you can kind of go through and see very, very similar to the /etc/profile, right? Where it's telling me, hey, you can put stuff in here. Environment things should go in /etc/profile. And then it's saying it's not a good idea to change this unless you know what you're doing. Same as the other one, because this could affect every user, not just yourself. So we definitely want to be careful with that. That's a lot of different places to go. And I put them all in the show notes so you guys have the kind of reference of where they are.
Thank you.
But at the end of the day, really, the one we care about the most is that .bashrc file and .profile also, the ones in our home directory. Those are the ones that we're going to interact with the most.
So Don, what's an example of something we would want to configure?
Okay, so, honestly, the default config might be good enough for you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. I know a lot of people that prefer not to change their configuration, because if you move from system to system really frequently, you don't want to have a bunch of shortcuts and things created in yours. And then you go to some other computer, all your shortcuts are gone, right? You don't have them. Now you got to kind of remember the old way. So some people prefer not to configure it at all. But there are a few basic things that you will find that you can't avoid, or it's super annoying to avoid. For example, the path, right? When I run a command, so if let me get out of this and get back into my home directory. If I'm in my home directory and I run a command, like I want to figure out what IP address I have. And so I use IP ADDR, right? I'm using the IP command. When I run that, how did it find the IP command? Well, it has what's called a system path. And that path is a list of directories that it looks through to be able to find that command. Where the heck did that command come from, right? And that's set with a variable. If I just type echo $path, then it's going to return for me a list of all the directories that it looked in. So when I typed IP and pressed enter, right, first it looked in this directory, /usr/lib64/qt-3.3/bin. And I'll bet you it didn't find it there. So then it looked in /usr/local/bin. And then /usr/local/sbin. And it just looked through directory after directory. See how they're separated by colons, right? Each one's a directory. So it looked in those folders to try and find the executable. And when it found it, which, let's see, it is in /usr/sbin is where it found it. That was way down here. It would have been like the 6th directory it checked. It found the command and it ran it. I didn't have to remember what folder it was in. Well, if you start installing custom software, where does your custom software go? Well, a lot of times it goes in the /opt folder, right? /opt. And as I look at this path, I don't see /opt in here at all. And so I might want to add the folder of my custom software into here. A way to cheat around that is you could create a link to your custom software and put the link in /user/sbin or something like that you know is already in the path. We can add it though. Another thing that might be useful is adding, there's a little shortcut. If you write a lot of scripts, which I find I do. So I've got a script here called sysinfo.sh. Okay. Now, if you write a script and you mark it as executable and it's ready to run, and you want to run it, when I type sysinfo.sh, okay, if I've left my path the way that it is by default, it doesn't look in the directory that I'm currently in. It looks in all these other directories, but it doesn't look here. And so if you've been watching, the commands that I've been typing in the show, you'll notice a lot of times when I call a script, I do / right before it. Okay, and if you were wondering why I was doing that, that's because the current directory, or dot, that's the alias for the current directory, is not in the path. And so by typing / sysinfo.sh, it now knows where to look. Look in the folder that I'm in right now, right? So what a lot of developers like to do is they like to modify the path and add dot, add that alias right to the end that says, when I run it, just look in the current directory and see if there's something right there. And a lot of times there is. So if I wanted to change that, I would need to make a decision. Do I want to change this for everybody, globally, go into /etc/profile, or do I want to just change it for myself? And if I want to change it for myself, I can change it in 2 different places. I can put it in .profile because it's a variable, it's part of my environment, or I can put it in .bashrc. I've kind of got that choice, or sorry, bash profile. Sorry, I'm sticking with profiles on this one. These are variables, environment stuff. We usually put those in the profile files. So that's where I want this to go. Now, I don't have a .profile file. That's not the end of the world. I could create one, but I do, or at least I think I did, have a bash_profile. I do. And since I've already got one of those, why create 2 different environments when you have to go hunt through configs if I can just recycle this one and use it? Now, if I'm going to use other shells, then I'd want it to go in .profile. But since I'm just using bash, I'm going to put it right in here. So I'm going to edit that. I'm just going to use Vim. You can use nano or whatever. And I'll do /bash_profile. I'm going to pull that up. And as you look in here, you'll see the path. There's the path. Now, that's a lot smaller than what I showed you on the screen a moment ago when I echoed the path variable, okay? And the reason is it's taking the current path that was set globally, and then it's adding this other stuff to the end of it, right? So we're building off of the path that's being set other places. That's why we need to know where all these different config files are. So I just want to modify this. I'm just modifying it for me. And I'm going to come in here to the end of this, and I'm going to add : to tell it I'm going to do a new path, and then dot to tell it the current directory, that folder. Or if I wanted to be specific, like /home/dpossess, I could do that, but I mean just whatever folder I happen to be in at that time, and that's a dot. So I'm going to set that. Now, when you make a change like that, it does not take effect until bash loads again. So I'm currently in bash. That's not going to take effect. If I exit out and I go back into my terminal, now that stuff is going to be loaded and processed again, okay, and read. There's actually a command I could have used called source, and you can do source and then point to that file name, and that'll tell it to refresh. That works mostly, right? Closing bash and relaunching it, that works 100%. I know it's going to work. And so now when I'm looking at this folder, instead of calling one of these scripts, so my sysinfo, it's a script I use that just kind of outputs information about my system, the kernel, CPU, memory, disk space, that kind of stuff. I could run it with /sysinfo.sh, right? That would have worked before. But now I can just type sysinfo.sh and, oh, shoot. Well, I kind of anticlimactic, I guess, but I got an error. So it says sysinfo.sh command not found, right? Which means it didn't look in the current folder. So it didn't work the way that I wanted it to. So let's check my work here and make sure I did this right. I'm going to do an echo $path and just take a look at the path that's listed there. And sure enough, the dot that I put in is not there. Now, I closed my window and launched it again. That, I just got done saying that works 100%. I must have a bash session open in the background somewhere. So let me just double check that real quick. I'm going to do a psaux, and I'll pipe that into the grep command looking for bash. And what I suspect is that I've got more than one bash environment. I do. Yep. So I've got bash running a couple of different times for different things, and that's stopping it from loading that file. So in this case, I've got a few choices. I could go and close the other stuff, although I don't know what it is, so it's probably my main session, which means I'd probably have to reboot. I don't want to do that. So instead, remember that source command I mentioned? Yes. I'm going to use that. I can type source, and then I can point to that .bash_profile file. So the command is source, and I just space ~.bash_profile. And when I run that, that says refresh that file, at least for this session. Those other sessions still won't be refreshed, but this one should now be. And so now that that's done, if I type sysinfo.sh, there we go. It runs, and now I get my system information that pops up, and I didn't have to specify a path. And the reasoning there being that if I echo $path, I should see right there at the end, now it loaded the dot right there. So be careful with that. You know, as you modify these configuration files, they don't take effect right away, and there can be a few things that stop them from loading, like what I just ran into.
Don, are all variables configured the same way?
You know, so that was an example of setting a variable. We set the path variable, and if you look at how that was done, right? So if I go back into my bash profile here, the way it's kind of written here, it's just path equals and then a bunch of data, right? That is really the basic way of setting a variable. Any variable can be set that way, even just in the middle of what you're doing. So for example, if I said example equals and then type some text, you know, I'll just do hello, all right? I just created a variable called example, and I just stuck the word hello into it. And so now if I were to call that, if I were to do echo $example, then it's going to echo not $example, it's going to echo hello, right? The $sign is important. That's how I tell bash I'm calling a variable, right? If I just typed echo example, it would think I wanted to echo that word. And so then it echoes the word example. So setting a variable is super easy. And that's really what's being done in that bash profile. However, I do want to point out one thing. When you create variables like this, like I just created that example variable, that's tied to my session. If I go to other bash windows, or if I launch a new bash window or launch an application, they're not going to see that variable. That is tied to my environment right now inside this one shell. So if I want to create a variable that is available in every shell that I launch or across applications, then I need to do what's called making it global. And if you want to make a variable global, there's a few ways to do it. The export command is the most common way to do it. And so you would type export followed by the name of that variable, and that's going to convert it and make it global now. So now it's available across my different shells or different applications as I spawn them. And so with a lot of variables, this is going to get set. And it'll either be done this way, or there is another way to do it where you can cheat and just say make all of my variables global, right? On a workstation, that's probably fine. On a server, that's a really bad idea. because you can store all sorts of data in a variable, maybe even sensitive data, and all the other users on that server would be able to see it. And variables aren't really protected. So it's not like somebody would need root access to be able to look at the variables. You can just run a command, env. And when you run that command, it shows all the variables tied to your session. And if you just converted something global, it's going to turn up in here and people will be able to see that. So be careful with it. But the reason I point all that stuff out is that a lot of these variables are really useful and they're set not by you, but by the system. The operating system is creating these variables and putting them in place. Others are created by your script. So, when you log in, your login scripts run and do things. And that's really what we're manipulating when we look at that bash underscore profile is it's setting that path. And then right after it, see how it's exporting it, right? So that it'll be available across each of my shells and each of the applications that I run. So be aware that you don't technically need the export, but it definitely changes the behavior of the variable, and it's something you want to watch out for. I mentioned, I lost track, Zach. Did I show the command to actually set all the variables to be global?
I am not quite sure, but
I don't think I did.
I don't think you did. Though.
Let me show you guys that real quick.
I want to say yes just to make you happy.
I told you on a server it's a bad idea, and then I think I didn't show the command.
Yeah.
So if you want to convert all your variables to be global and just say forget it, make them all global, what you can do is run set -o all export like that. And that command will say just take any of my variables and set them to be exported, and that's the end of it. And now you don't have to worry about it. Again, on a workstation, if you're the only user, that's probably not a big deal, but on a server, bad idea. So not something I'd recommend.
Are there any variables that behave differently?
Yeah, there's some variables that kind of disguise themselves that we don't think of as variables. An example of that would be, for example, aliases. If you run the alias command, it'll give you a list of aliases on your system. All right, and see how that structure is built up. It's not like a variable. A variable would be a word equals and then something. Here it's alias followed by a word equals something. And that word isn't just a name, it's a command. These are all shortcut commands. When I run ls, I'm getting a directory listing, and it's all pretty and in color, okay? But I just typed ls. I didn't actually give it the command to tell it to make it color. But what's happened is an alias has been put in right in here somewhere. Oh, here. So there's an alias for L dot that equals ls-d dot star -- color equals auto. That's where the color is coming from. Now notice how it's L dot. That dot is a wild card. It's not ls, it's L dot. That means that it could capture a number of different things in that second character. A little bit further down, I see an actual alias for ls there, which just has that -- color equals auto. So that one's going to be grabbing everything. And showing me that in color. And you'll see other aliases for things like grep, egrep, fgrep. Each one of them, they're adding color. Vi is being aliased to vim, right? Technically, these are variables, but they're being managed by that alias command. So they behave differently. If I do, here, so there's an alias for vi. If I do echo $vi like that, I don't get anything back. It's not treated like a regular variable. But it is set that way by using that alias command. And you can add your own just by typing alias and then a shortcut name equals and what the actual command would be. You can also use unalias if you want to remove an alias from your session. So if I don't want an alias for vi to point to vim, I could do unalias vi and it would remove that shortcut. And now when I ran vi, it would actually look for a command called vi as opposed to that shortcut. So that's an example of something that's different. And you'll see aliases set in like your bash RC file is usually where those turn up, which I haven't really messed with. So let me pull that up real quick. I'm going to just do vim /.bash RC. And when I pull that one up, nope, my aliases are not here. So they are stuck somewhere else. Sometimes you have to poke around until you find the right file, or you can just grep your whole directory is usually what I end up doing. But if we take bash profile, they might have been in there. They are not. And then there was .profile. One of these will have my alias, or they might actually be set globally. That's right, I don't have a .profile. So these might actually be set globally, and then I can create my own aliases inside of bash RC, and those will get run there. But just be aware, aliases are a little bit different, even though they are built off of that idea of a variable.
So are there any other ways to create custom commands?
Yeah, absolutely. The aliases is just making a nickname that then points to some kind of command that you run, right? Typically just one command. But you might actually want to build your own command, but that's really just a kind of a combination. We can recycle my sysinfo. Here, let me show you. In my home directory, I've got this script, sysinfo.sh, right? And if you look at it, it's a really simple script. It just echoes a few things out, right? Kernel information, operating system version, system uptime, memory utilization, and file system utilization, right? And then it's running certain commands to populate that data. So in order to get the kernel information, it's running uname-a. And then to get the OS, it's looking for the CentOS-release file. For system uptime, it's just running the uptime command and so on. So it's a series of commands that are all just being run in order, right? That's really all script is. Well, in Bash, Bash is really a programmer's interface. So I could take this script and turn it into a function instead. And when it's a function, I could then take that and call it just like it was an actual command. It's not an alias, it's just an actual command. So let me show you how that works. I'm going to copy this so I don't have to type it twice. And I'm going to edit my bashrc file. So I'll edit /.bashrc. All right. And there's a number of things that are already in here. I'm going to ignore all them and just kind of move to the end. And at the end, I'm going to create a new function. Now, when you create a function, you first off tell it you're creating a function. And then you have to give the function a name. The name of the function is like the command name. So what do I want to type in order to execute this command? I want to type sysinfo. All right. Now, some commands expect you to pass command line options or arguments to it. And so for those, you would do open and close parentheses. And in the middle, you would name each of the options that were being passed to it. We'll see that more in our scripting episodes. But for this one, I just want to run sysinfo, and I want to get some data back. All right. Then I'm going to go ahead and do a squiggly or curly brace to open up a series of commands. And I'm just going to paste in all those commands from earlier. So here they are. And I will use proper indenting so this looks nice. And there's each of the commands that were in my script. All right. And then I'm just going to close that out with another curly brace to close out my function. All right. So that's done. And now I've got that function defined. Now let me go ahead and save that file. And I'm going to go ahead and source my .bashrc file so that'll load. Or again, you can close out and come back into Bash. That'll reload it as well. But once that's done, earlier I was running the sysinfo.sh script, right? It has an extension on it. But now I should be able to run sysinfo by itself. And when I run that, there it goes, and it executed that. That didn't come from the script saved in my home directory. That came from my bashrc profile where I defined that function. If I were to do like a which sysinfo and run that, it's going to return where that ran from. And it's telling me there is no sysinfo. It doesn't exist, right? Because it's not in the path. It's not in any of these folders. It came from my bash config. So that's a neat way to kind of create custom commands, and that'll be tied to your profile right there inside of bashrc.
Well, is there a way to make these settings available to all users?
You can, yeah, absolutely. So, we could cheat a little bit and move this into like the global profile, the global bash config or whatever. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it, though, is to make it kind of part of a default user's profile. You might remember from an earlier episode, we talked about the skeleton directory, which is /etc/skel, /etc/skel. And if you go into that folder, what you're going to see, if you do a ls-a, is the files that are used to create a new user's home directory. And so if I wanted that sysinfo command to be there for everybody, but still allow them to override it, I could put it in /etc/skel/.bashrc and put it right in there. And when somebody's new is created, it'll be copied to them, they'll have it, but they can remove it if they don't want it, right? If I put it in the global command, or in the global config, it's going to be available for everybody. And they won't be able to, well, I guess they could override it if they created a new command with the same name, but they wouldn't be able to just remove it. That would be kind of stuck there. This gives them a little more control, but this only applies to new users. If you have existing users, they wouldn't have it. We would need to add it to their files individually. So a couple of different ways to go about it. Usually the bash configurations, though, are tailored to the user, so they have an expectation of the way that it's going to behave. The global stuff that we change, anything we change there, we need to communicate to our users so they know that the bash prompt or bash shell that they're in might not behave like a normal shell somewhere else.
Awesome episode as usual, Don. Configuring Bash. I enjoyed it. I'm sure you did too. Before we move on, though, anything else you'd like to say?
We really just kind of touched the tip of the iceberg on this one. There's a ton more you can configure in Bash. If you go out there and look, there's tons of documentation. You can customize the prompt, all sorts of different things you can tweak. But what I really wanted to touch on in this episode were where the configuration comes from and how variables work. Because we're going to need that information for our next episode where we're going to take a look at how to write Bash scripts. And those scripts really rely on variables, and a lot of that comes from what we just saw here in this episode. So it's important knowledge to have, and we're going to continue building on that, so stay tuned.
Thanks, Don. Incentive to watch the next episode, absolutely. And here's another incentive for you. Watch every single episode of CompTIA Linux Plus. It's going to help you now and in the future. And don't forget about the supplementary information in the course library. It's there to do one thing, help you be even more successful, so check that out too. And tell everybody you know about IT Pro TV. IT Pro TV is binge-worthy. Thanks for watching. I'm Zach Memis.
And I'm Don Pizzette.
We will see you again soon.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.